And a lot of that has found to be, they have found to be exaggeration and gone through the personal filter. That it's as much feral dogs as it is wolves, as it was just a really hard winter.
I was going to say, maybe it's a sign of the times, like for the wolf, maybe it was an extra hard winter for them, and
usually when you see that
other resources were sparse, and so that's why they responded to that.
Yeah,
exactly.
The other thing is other weird creatures. There is folklore around the world of human-animal transformation. There are swan manes and selkies and bear brides and like that's my degree actually.
Oh, fantastic. Do you want to come up here?
No.
I'm serious.
No, I would embarrass my professors. But there is folklore in cultures all over the world describing different classes of beings and people who are temporarily dispelled or cursed and who can be freed of that or who can't, but it's all kinds of creatures. And I think some of the most well-known are probably selkies and swan manes and things like that. Probably everybody knows.
It's amazing the way they used to diagnose schizophrenia back then. It's she's a shapeshifter.
The unknown was usually explained by magic or some supernatural.
She's a witch.
Aliens.
She turned into a new.
Or also, we were on a different frequency back then. You know, there's a different. Reality is an interesting little slippery slope. I mean, we live in the third dimension. They say in the fourth dimension, thought and time become intertwined. Who's to know? Who's to know? Different shapes there were.
So one thing that's interesting, I was actually just reading an article about within the last couple weeks, even though I wasn't researching for this panel, like Sam, is the dire wolf. Now, the dire wolf we know is a much larger form of wolf. And for the longest time, we had assumed that the dire wolf basically had disappeared very early.
They all went to Westeros.
I was
Okay, good, touche. But they're starting to find some archaeological evidence, and we've had folkloric evidence, but we're starting to find some archaeological evidence that that may not be in the case. That the dire wolf may have not completely disappeared, but inbred.
But where's the bones for this animal?
Well, that's the thing. The inbred, it would have been bred with other wolves, so they've gotten smaller.
But I mean, I'm sure. I mean, we found a lot of different kinds.
Well, you're finding a lot of dire wolf bones, but they're very old. And
How
there's
old?
some evidence that maybe when they gotten smaller, that occasionally they wouldn't. You know, you would get that one pup that, you know, like a redhead, mom and dad both carried that recessive gene. And you would get this one pup that was much abnormally larger.
It's probably similar to, there is a breed of tiger called the heterozygous tiger. And I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, they have the orange fur, but if you breed two together, they have the recessive gene and can have white kittens.
Yeah.
Albino.
Not albino. It is not albino. They have blue eyes. It's white tigers. But they specifically are a hybrid dominant recessive. So when you breed two parents that have the dominant and the recessive, just like you get a kid with blue eyes, even if both of their parents have brown, they can have white cubs.
But with the dire wolf, if you look at the archaeological evidence of how much bigger a dire wolf is, dire wolves are huge.
Well,
You're talking small ponies.
There was an ancient species. I mean, I don't know, my son loves the BBC sort of, you know, those old, not the old, but whether it's, who is it, Kenneth Branagh? He does, you know, the Monsters Before Time and all that. But there was one species in there that, yeah, they say was based off wolves or wolves.
Right.
It led to wolves, and it was it was over 1,000 pounds. But I mean, that was
Well, the question I was going to say
way back. It was like Triassic.
Yeah, I'm not going that far. But the question is, they've started to say that the dire wolf and our ancestors may have overlapped. That there may have been a time, and if that's the case, we may still be dealing with folkloric and fairy tale stories from those original attacks. Because they would be terrifying.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we were hunting.
We were no longer the apex predator.
Yeah, we were hunting mammoths at a certain point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we were about snack food.
Not sure we were ever snack food, but
we were
Crunchy,
really,
more crunchy nuts.
Crunchy and good at catching.
exactly.
Crunchy nuggets of
I
goodness.
think we were pretty easy eats for a long time.
Anything you'd like that we haven't touched on yet? Touched on it. Candy?
Going back to books, and this is probably like way back to the beginning of this discussion, it's been stuck in the back of my mind while I was listening to everything else, but it seems to me that in books, there's more of an ability for the character to have a relationship with the wolf. Like there's a duality to the character where I think of Patricia Briggs as a character who calls his wolf Brother Wolf. And so, I mean, so it's almost like they're separate entities. They talk about the wolf as a different thing that's living inside them. But that's not something that it seems like it would be easy to portray in media, or so that might be why books are a little more popular than.
Alice Borchardt as well writes a very good werewolf series set in the fall, like just after the fall of Rome, and there is a romance aspect to it. Her sister is actually Anne Rice, so it does have some you can tell that they're sisters when you see the way when you read it. More than sexual overtone. It's a romance novel. Let's lay it out on the table. It is a romance novel. But you can get away with that in prose instead of actually portraying it on TV, because there were so many things that are so taboo. I mean, things are trending towards being able to show stuff like that, and I've noticed that in a lot of TV lately, so I think we may be able to start seeing more of that if someone will.
You mean I'm gonna have to be in like full prosthetics and a sex scene for my next one? That's gonna be really awkward.
I'm gonna just chew on my straw. I will not complain.
Anybody want to be a werewolf for real?
Depends on which part of the mythology we're buying into.
Which kind do you want to be? For all the cinematic werewolves, which kind do you want to be?
The Twilight. Oh, gosh.
The Twilight.
Shapeshifters are not werewolves.
Oh, whatever.
As long as I don't lose complete control of my
But
conscious
so
self.
they can control what they
that's
do.
my big thing. It's
Werewolf
like, I don't want to go
kills.
full on beast.
And we want to go to like a real.
Well, actually, what's kind of
And
interesting
if I
with
get to
the,
live a lot longer, like if I'm, hundreds of years of lifespan, yes, I'm in.
I think it would be fascinating though to be able to do that, to have that change, if you could remember everything from when you were in.
Well, I remember.
Like, it would just be fascinating to me, because you have to think, like, even just as basic as dogs versus humans, dogs have to have some sort of, like, there's something going on in the brain all the time. What is it? So to be able to like transform over to that and be what? Right, exactly. There's got to be something going on in their brain. So I think that would be fascinating if the stipulation would be if you could remember everything when you were in wolf form. Like, it would just be a really fascinating study, I think.
I think for me, that's why I would like to be probably a werewolf from the Southern Vampire Mysteries, aka True Blood. Because most of them, like, Sam Merlot was a special case because he didn't shift to a wolf, but he remembered. I mean, of course, when he falls asleep, he ends up naked on someone's bed. That's how you find out he's a shifter. But he does remember. He retains his memories.
What was that David Eddings with Polgara?
Yeah.
The Belgaria?
And the
What?
Lordian, I think.
Yeah, and they could shapeshift, but they were sorcerers, and it was will of the word, and they could only shift into something that was of similar. Their mass remained constant. So but they could shift into other animals. Like one of them could shift into a bird, but it was a big ass bird. It would be like but it could fly. But the danger of their shifting was that they could get lost in the mind of the animal. That as the mind shifted, it was harder for them to hold on to themselves, and you could only shift for certain periods of time. Otherwise, you would just end up being the animal.
I think it's the same in Earthsea, by Ursula K. Le Guin.
I have heard something like that.
Yeah, I think they shifted to birds, and like you had to be very careful not to get lost in the euphoria of, I was a human, I couldn't fly, now I'm flying.
Yeah, and I think that's a really cool part of it. Who wrote the Shannara?
Gary Brooks, yes.
And they're making that into a TV series. Right?
Yeah, it's on already. Going to season 2.
It was good, but for my problem with it is I had just finished Elfstones of Shannara, whichever book the series was the second book. And so it's just so fresh in my mind that just watching the events, like it was very much an adaptation.
Where did they film that?
Yeah.
It's very aimed at the MTV demographic.
Very much so.
And
That was the other thing.
I'm not saying we're inviting Terry Brooks for next year, but we're inviting Terry Brooks for next year. I'm just throwing that out there because I've already made the offer. We just have to wait for him to decide whether he's coming. So.
Where does he live?
He lives in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. Anyway.
All right, in the back by the door, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention that the underworld werewolves, the fact that there was 2 different types, that there were ones that could shift, and they remembered, and they were also very long-lived as well. They're like Lucius in the story, he's at least 500 years old.
Yeah.
But he was also the first of his kind.
And don't the werewolves in Mortal Instruments remember 2 when they shift?
I love that.
Yes, they do. They do, they certainly do.
I actually have a question for everybody. Why do you think werewolves and vampires are mortal enemies all the time? Like almost all the time.
Unless it's being human and they're roommates, so they can rent.
Well, no, but see, with being human, the vampire was he was sort of an outcast from the other vampires.
True. Everybody else.
So yeah, nobody really
didn't want to be a werewolf.
Right. They all wanted to be human.
I think it just stems from Hollywood.
Understood, the vampires made the werewolves slaves.
That's true.
The other thing is
I love when people say, that's true. This is how the shit starts, guys.
How many of you out in the audience are werewolves?
Something for the vampires versus werewolves kind of thing is also could be the fact that it's a natural thing of predatory competition. Humans are the prey, and you have basically two competing.
Okay, 2 things. One, I think it comes from the fact that the vampire myth came from death and disease, whereas the werewolf myth was very much based in life or this natural being. So I think you have nature versus death there, life versus death.
What should be the circle of life, but
yeah, kind of thing. But I think it's also similar to what she was saying there is, well, if the werewolves and the vampires team up, then we really are just a midnight snack. You know? And so I think Hollywood has to put them against each other, because otherwise, if they're on the same side, we're out of luck.
Yeah. I think it's very much a modern Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
You just needed, got the 2 things, cannot work together. Hollywood is built on confrontation.
Because it does seem to be just more in the last several years that's really come up, because generally they just were kept apart, really.
No, the Universal did it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's also probably just team this kind of conflict up because Wolfman and Dracula was one of their probably hot properties back in the early days. And probably the same thing like us today, Batman versus Superman, who would win? We probably had fanboys and fangirls back
Captain
in,
America Civil War.
you know, back then saying, you know, Dracula's better, no, Wolfman's better, Frankenstein or whatever, you know. And Hollywood will feed on that. They will give us what we want to see, just, you know, for the...
Well, actually,
What would win, a great white shark or a polar bear?
Don't laugh, that could be a sci-fi movie next week.
I thought that already was.
Run back.
In the back of this.
Yeah, well, a lot of it's already been said that actually, yeah, the mythologies had nothing to do with each other. They were from two different areas of human development. The vampire and the werewolf mythology. It's a more recent movie-based thing. So I think an interesting question is, you have shapeshifters in Europe, but you also, the Twilight thing, you have shapeshifters in Europe, and you also have shapeshifters amongst the native tribes of America, but the mythology is so different. Where being a shapeshifter in a Native American tribe is a part of their spirituality is considered a normal thing. But in Europe, if you're a shapeshifter, you're a monster. And I think that's such an interesting dichotomy. Why did it go this way?
Because the white people are scared of everything.
I was thinking religion. Religion plays into it. When you think of the native tribes, they were very animist. The spirit animals, it was part of their spirituality to bring these aspects out, to have aspects of the animals around you. Whereas in Europe, you're still talking about a time when Christianity was so strong, and
anything that wasn't what they believed was bad.
Exactly, and I mean, you do have like the Druids and other animist religions that were part of nature, and that was.
And they also had that. I mean, I'm sure in pagan spirituality, like the stag.
Yeah, shapeshifting was actually very common in Celtic mythology.
But when you think of like Christianity and how they took over and how anything that was not a part of their beliefs, oh my God, evil, bad.
Demonized.
I think that has a lot to play into it.
All right, back over here. Is it my name here?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing that
That war that you always talk about, the fighting between the two. Because I was back in, when I was little, watching stuff with my dad. He's the one that got me into sci-fi, which I don't regret. But anyway, he loved the Universal films, and even in this, it was a comedy, Abbott and Costello.
Oh, yes.
At the very end of that, the Wolfman grabs Dracula just as he turns into a bat, and they go down. So, I mean, it was even back then.
When you start talking about the vampire versus werewolf, thinking of that one scene. Was that the first werewolf one?
Yeah. The Wolfman.
No, there were some earlier werewolf movies. There was a really early one that the print was lost of, where they actually used a wolf. And instead of the Wolfman, they actually used a wolf in the werewolf movie. I think it was from 1912.
The Werewolf, 1913.
I remember the movie that redeemed the old werewolves from Europe. Remember Lady Hawk?
Oh, yeah.
I just remember, Rooker Hauer, he turned into that black wolf, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was awesome.
I think part of the reason also that werewolves and vampires never meet is that werewolves are very much in contact with your beast, whereas vampires have always been the intellect. In one variation or another, I mean, it has gone from that to sex, this, that, but it's always been about the intellect. And it's the heart versus the mind, and these two never work together. Lady Hawk and Teen Wolf, are there other nicer werewolves or shifters out there? Harry Potter. Yeah.
Blood and chocolate.
Oh yes, that was no, because
some of them are better than others.
Well, actually, but the thing is, in Blood and Chocolate, what they went for was they went for total isolation because they were being hunted by humans, And usually the people that they hunted were the real scum of the earth.
Yeah.
The drug dealers, the really bad criminal people that you can't really think that society would miss too much.
So you had vigilante werewolves.
Yeah,
If I could be a
basically.
werewolf or vampire, I'd totally be a vigilante. That'd be awesome.
I can't say I condone it. I'd understand it, definitely.
There's a superhero comic that's they call the Astounding Werewolf. It's literally a superhero that is a werewolf.
Cool.
The one shifter I could think of that's a nice one, actually is what from bad to good, is Fables. Big Steve.
Yeah,
Big
Big
Wolf.
B Wolf.
Yeah.
He's the big bad wolf. And he is the sheriff of Fabletown. And I totally forgot about Big B, but he is an amazing.
Yeah. He's basically, to me, like DC's answer to Wolverine. He's just,
Wasn't there also
he's awesome.
a member of the X-Men, Rain?
Rain is a werewolf.
Yeah, is a werewolf. And I think she's Scottish.
Yeah.
Scottish.
Yeah, and
And she's hilarious.
yeah, she was a member of the X-Men.
I'm Scottish. I have a thistle tattoo, but yeah.
I don't think she transforms by the moon, but she could just shift.
Yeah, she can just shift. She'll be in the New Mutants movie when it
Yeah,
comes out.
she started out as a New Mutant, became an X-Men, and went through.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes left. Anything else that we haven't discussed that you would like to bring up?
No.
Actually, the gentleman was mentioning, werewolves as protectors. In the witch trials, there were werewolf trials along with the witch trials. There was documentation of the Benedante, which were basically, they were brought up on charges of lycanthropy, and they said, well, yes, we're werewolves, but we go out and protect the village from evil witches. And that was in the transcripts of some witchcraft trials. And I always thought it would be an interesting mythology to work with.
Well, that's actually Irish. That's actually derivative from Irish mythology. They were actually protectors of children, and they were basically evil spirits.
What's funny is when you're talking about how common the werewolf is, you look at some of the Cajun werewolves and some of these, it really is, the shapeshifter is all through folklore and mythology, if you look for it. A lot of times what we're seeing with the werewolves is it's almost like the flavor of the month. They're suddenly become popular. But the other shapeshifters, they're out there. They just never became popular, and you have to look for them.
Actually, the movie The Secret of Rowan Inish is about the Selkie, which is a very nice movie.
They're becoming so warm and cuddly. They're not scary anymore.
Yeah, no.
Maybe when they're born and they're still in puppy stage.
Little fluff balls.
Watch Wolf Children. It's sweet.
Being Human, there's another one, more positive light on shapeshifters.
But it was mentioned before, none of them wanted to be the archetypes. They're kind of outcasts of their archetype. So the other werewolves in Being Human are not very nice, are not good people. And the same
You haven't seen The Golden King.
Not the UK. I've been
the US version.
There are some werewolves that are not evil.
Yeah, I'm a majority.
Well, that's the thing is with Being Human, you have small packs. There aren't a lot, and there wasn't a lot of werewolf exposure in Being Human. It was mostly the focus was on the vampires, and the werewolves that were there, they traveled in small packs, and in some cases became a pack when the two main werewolves got together and had a baby.
Anything else? You're allowed to
Anybody bring up Red Riding Hood from Once Upon a Time?
That's true. Very true. Yes. Yeah. She killed her lover
boyfriend
at the time. Because when she transforms into a wolf, she loses. She does not remember.
She does now, but
she does now. But I think they've had to use a cloak to transform her back.
Yeah, her red cloak was what kept her from
from being transforming. And like her original love interest, like she's confirmed bisexual. I don't know if anyone heard about that. Like, yeah, she's now confirmed with Dorothy from.
I think it's a hoot that it was Dorothy.
Okay, I'd like to end this on a survey. Who here would prefer to be a werewolf? Who's here would like to be a werewolf? And you, or a vampire. But you can work with both. Okay, who here like to be werewolves? Werewolves? Anyone? Werewolves? 1, 2, 3.
Depending on the mythology you're going with.
Vampires?
Lycanthropy or
vampires. Allison, you're right on it. Really? So more werewolves in the audience than vampires. All right. Why? Okay. So werewolves are eating. What do you guys eat as werewolves?
Steak.
Again, it depends on your
Like
mythology.
anything. Like werewolves don't have to go out
On your
and kill
mythology.
people.
If you're
You
going
can
with
eat
the
a
modern
deer.
mythology,
As a
you
vampire, you need to eat
People.
But does it have to be human blood?
No.
Depends on your
Can you be a vegan vampire?
Thank you. That's exactly what I
So
said.
I take it just want to stay human. Is that right? Everyone else here is satisfied with being human?
I mean, is like wizard in there? Cause I'll
It wasn't in there.
I would rather be a werewolf, but I'm also an amateur astronomer, and you know that one day of the month when the moon is awesome, that would be really difficult for me to do any kind of astronomy.
I think what it is, like, I wouldn't want to be a werewolf, but I'd like to be a shifter.
There you go.
Yeah. The romanticizing of vampires. I don't do well in rigid, formal situations, and a lot of the archetypal vampires you see are nobility and very formal in the way they talk. There are some exceptions, but like when you think of the classic vampire, I have no desire to be involved in that, which is why I would prefer personally to be a werewolf. There is some formality, there are pack, like rank, like someone's the alpha, someone's the omega, but I don't feel like it's done by like might is right usually, and if you can fight your way up, you can do things. But like with a vampire, it's very political, backstabby.
I think that's another good point, is very often your vampires were loners.